The moment Tabitha Kerrigan saw her father's body hanging from the gallows in Ellsworth, Kansas, she knew her life as she had known it was over forever. She stood in the bitter January cold of 1878, watching as the executioner cut down what remained of the man who had raised her alone after her mother died in childbirth. Thomas Kerrigan had been convicted of a murder he swore he did not commit, and despite Tabitha's pleas and testimonies about his character, the judge had sentenced him to death. Now, at 20 years old, she stood alone in the world with nothing but the clothes on her back and $17 sewn into the hem of her threadbare coat. The crowd dispersed quickly after the hanging, leaving Tabitha standing in the snowy street with nowhere to go. The small room above the mercantile that she and her father had rented was no longer theirs. The landlord had evicted them the moment her father was arrested, and Tabitha had been sleeping in the church basement on the charity of Reverend Matthews ever since. But even that charity had its limits. The Reverend's wife had made it clear that morning that Tabitha could not stay past the execution. A convicted murderer's daughter brought shame upon the congregation. She had said with tight lips and colder eyes. Tabitha pulled her thin coat tighter around her shoulders and began walking. She did not know where she was going, only that she could not stay in Ellsworth. The stares, the whispers, the way shopkeepers suddenly remembered they had no work for her when she asked for employment. She had no future here. The frozen ground crunched beneath her worn boots as she made her way toward the edge of town, her few possessions wrapped in a faded flour sack. By the time night fell, Tabitha was several miles from Ellsworth, following a trail that wound through stands of bare cottonwood trees and across frozen creek beds. She had no destination in mind, no plan beyond putting distance between herself and the town that had killed her father. The temperature was dropping rapidly, and her breath came out in white clouds that disappeared into the darkening sky. She knew she should have stayed closer to town, should have swallowed her pride and begged the Reverend for one more night, but the thought of facing those judgmental eyes again made her stomach twist. The trail narrowed as it climbed a small rise, and when Tabitha reached the top, the wind hit her with such force that she stumbled. Her teeth were chattering now, and her fingers had gone numb inside her thin gloves. She scanned the landscape for any sign of shelter, but saw only endless prairie and scattered trees bending in the wind. Panic began to edge into her thoughts. She had been foolish to leave without a real plan, foolish to think she could simply walk away from everything. Then she saw it. A small flicker of orange light in the distance, barely visible through the blowing snow that had just begun to fall. A fire. Someone had made camp not far from the trail. Tabitha hesitated, knowing the dangers of approaching a stranger's camp in the wild. But the cold was becoming unbearable, and she could feel her legs growing weaker with each step. If she did not find warmth soon, she would not survive the night. She made her way down the slope toward the light, moving slowly to avoid twisted ankles on the uneven ground. As she drew closer, she could make out the shape of a man sitting beside the fire, his broad-brimmed hat pulled low over his face. A horse stood tethered nearby, and a simple camp had been set up with a bedroll and saddlebags arranged neatly on the ground. Tabitha stopped at the edge of the firelight, her heart pounding. She opened her mouth to speak, but her voice came out as barely more than a whisper. "Excuse me, sir." The man's head came up immediately, and his hand moved to the gun at his hip before he seemed to register that she was a woman and alone. He was younger than she had expected, perhaps 28 or 30, with dark hair visible beneath his hat and sharp features cast into shadow by the firelight. His eyes were a striking blue-green that seemed to see right through her. "Madam," he said, his voice low and cautious, You lost. Tabitha tried to respond, but her teeth were chattering too hard to form words. She nodded instead, hugging herself against the cold. The cowboy stood in one fluid motion, his tall frame unfolding with an easy grace. "Come to the fire," he said, gesturing toward the flames. "You are about frozen through." She hesitated, and he must have seen the fear in her eyes because he held up both hands, showing they were empty. "Name is Xavier Thornton," he said. "I am heading north to my ranch. You are safe here." Something in his steady gaze convinced her. Tabitha stumbled forward, her legs barely supporting her weight. Xavier caught her elbow as she swayed, guiding her to sit on his bedroll near the fire. He moved to his saddlebags and pulled out a thick wool blanket, which he draped around her shoulders without a word. The warmth from the fire began to seep into her frozen limbs, bringing a painful tingling sensation. Tabitha pulled the blanket tighter and stared into the flames, unable to meet Xavier's eyes. She could feel him watching her, but he did not press her with questions. "When did you last eat?" he asked after a long moment. Tabitha had to think about it. "Yesterday morning," she said quietly. Without another word, Xavier moved to the fire where a small pot hung over the flames. He ladled something that smelled like heaven into a tin cup and handed it to her. "Beef stew," he explained. "Not fancy, but it will warm you up." Tabitha accepted the cup with shaking hands and took a careful sip. The hot liquid burned her tongue, but she did not care. It was the best thing she had tasted in weeks. She drank it slowly, savoring every drop, while Xavier settled himself on the other side of the fire and watched her with those perceptive eyes. "You running from something?" he asked when she had finished the stew. Tabitha set the cup down carefully, her fingers wrapped around the blanket. "Running towards something, maybe," she said. "Or away from everything. I am not sure anymore." Xavier nodded slowly, as if that answer made perfect sense to him. "That is how I felt when I left my family's farm in Missouri 7 years ago. Sometimes you just need to start over. Did it work?" Tabitha asked, daring to look at him. "Starting over," a small smile touched his lips. "Some days I think so. I have a ranch now up near Salina. Small operation, just me and my hired hand, but it is mine. That counts for something." Tabitha felt a pang of longing so sharp it made her chest ache. To have something of your own, something no one could take away. That sounded like a dream beyond her reach. The wind picked up, sending snow swirling through the camp. Xavier glanced up at the sky, his expression growing serious. "Storm is coming in harder than I expected," he said. "You have somewhere to go, someone expecting you." Tabitha shook her head. "No one is expecting me." Xavier was quiet for a moment, and Tabitha could see him weighing his options. Finally, he stood and began rearranging his camp. "You can stay here tonight," he said. "I will keep the fire going. In the morning, we will figure out what comes next." "I cannot impose," Tabitha protested, though her body was screaming at her to accept his offer. "You already are imposing," Xavier said matter-of-factly, but there was no harshness in his tone. "Might as well be warm while you do it." Despite everything, Tabitha felt a small smile tug at her lips. It was the first time she had smiled since her father's trial began. Xavier unrolled a second blanket and created a makeshift shelter using branches and his rain slicker, positioning it to block the wind. He gestured for Tabitha to move under it, and when she did, the relief from the biting wind was immediate. He added more wood to the fire, building it up until the heat was substantial, then settled himself on the opposite side with his own blanket and his rifle within easy reach. "Get some rest," he said. "You look like you need it." Tabitha wanted to protest, wanted to explain that she could not simply accept charity from a stranger, but exhaustion was pulling at her like an undertow. She lay down on the hard ground, the blanket wrapped around her, and closed her eyes. She expected to lie awake worrying about her situation, but instead, she fell into a deep sleep almost immediately. She woke several times during the night to the sound of Xavier adding wood to the fire. Each time, she would see him sitting upright, keeping watch, and she would drift back to sleep feeling safer than she had in months. When dawn broke over the frozen prairie, Tabitha opened her eyes to find Xavier already up and making coffee over the rebuilt fire. The snow had stopped, leaving a thin white blanket over everything. The sky was a pale gray, promising another cold day. "Morning," Xavier said when he noticed she was awake. He poured coffee into a tin cup and held it out to her. "How do you feel?" "Better," Tabitha admitted, accepting the coffee. The warmth felt wonderful in her cold hands. "Thank you for letting me stay." Xavier shrugged. "Could not very well let you freeze to death." They drank their coffee in companionable silence as the sun slowly climbed higher. Tabitha knew she needed to make a decision about what to do next, but every option seemed impossible. She had no money for a stage ticket, no skills that would earn her employment, nowhere to go. "Can I ask you something?" Xavier said suddenly. Tabitha looked up, meeting his eyes. "Yes." "What is your name?" "Tabitha," she said. "Tabitha Kerrigan." Xavier's expression shifted slightly, and she knew immediately that he recognized the name. The execution in Ellsworth had probably been talked about in every town within 50 miles. "Your father," he said slowly. "The hanging yesterday." Tabitha looked away, her throat tight. "Yes." "I am sorry," Xavier said, and the sincerity in his voice made her eyes burn with unshed tears. "That is a hard thing to bear." "He did not do it," Tabitha said fiercely. "He was not a murderer. They got the wrong man." Xavier did not argue or try to convince her otherwise. He simply nodded. "I believe you." Those 3 words broke something inside her. Tabitha felt tears spill down her cheeks, and she covered her face with her hands, ashamed of her weakness. She had not cried at the execution, had not cried when the Reverend's wife turned her away, had not cried through the long, cold walk. But Xavier's simple statement of faith in her and her father undid her completely. She felt Xavier move closer, and then his hand was on her shoulder, a solid, comforting weight. "It is all right," he said quietly. "You are allowed to grieve." Tabitha cried until she had no tears left, and Xavier stayed beside her the entire time, not speaking, just being present. When she finally lifted her head, she felt emptied out but somehow lighter. "I am sorry," she said, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "I did not mean to fall apart." "Nothing to apologize for," Xavier said. He moved back to the other side of the fire and began packing up his camp with efficient movements. "Listen, I have been thinking. You need a place to go, and I need help at the ranch. My hired hand's wife just had a baby, and she has been asking if I knew anyone who could help with cooking and household work. The pay would not be much, but you would have a place to stay and 3 meals a day." Tabitha stared at him, not quite believing what she was hearing. "You are offering me a job, if you want it," Xavier said, not meeting her eyes as he rolled up his bedroll. "No obligation. I can take you to Salina if you would rather try your luck there, but the offer stands if you want it." Tabitha's mind raced. She did not know this man, did not know if his offer was genuine or if there were strings attached. But what choice did she have? She could go to Salina with $17 to her name and try to find work, but that was no guarantee of success. At least at Xavier's ranch, she would have shelter and food while she figured out her next move. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. Xavier finally looked at her, and his expression was serious. "Because someone helped me once when I needed it. And because leaving you out here to freeze did not sit right with me. You need help and I can give it, simple as that." It was not simple, not really, but Tabitha found herself nodding. "All right," she said. "I will come to your ranch, thank you." Xavier's face relaxed into a small smile. Good. We can be there by late afternoon if we ride steady. I do not have a horse, Tabitha said, feeling foolish for not thinking of that sooner. You can ride with me, Xavier said, gesturing to his horse. Ranger can handle both of us for one day. Within an hour, they had broken camp completely. Xavier helped Tabitha up onto Ranger, then swung up behind her. She stiffened at the proximity, but Xavier kept a respectful distance, his arms on either side of her as he held the reins. "Ready?" he asked. "Ready," Tabitha replied, though she was not sure that was true. They rode north across the winter landscape, following trails that Xavier seemed to know by heart. He pointed out landmarks as they went, explaining the geography in his low, steady voice. Tabitha found herself relaxing despite her circumstances. There was something calming about Xavier's presence, a quiet confidence that made her feel safe. As they rode, Xavier asked gentle questions about her life, and Tabitha found herself talking more than she had in months. She told him about her father's work as a carpenter, about how they had moved to Ellsworth 3 years ago hoping for a fresh start after her mother died. She told him about the day the sheriff came to arrest her father, about the trial that felt more like a lynching, about the witness who swore he saw Thomas Kerrigan arguing with the murdered man on the night in question. "My father was home with me that night," Tabitha said, her voice breaking. "He never left the house, but no one would believe me. They said I would lie to protect him." "That is a hard thing," Xavier said. "Justice is not always just." They stopped briefly at midday to rest the horse and eat some dried beef and hardtack from Xavier's supplies. Tabitha was struck by how natural it felt to be in Xavier's company, as if they had known each other longer than a single night. He was not talkative, but when he spoke, his words had weight. He listened more than he talked, and Tabitha found herself appreciating that quality. "Can I ask you something?" Tabitha said as they prepared to continue riding. "Sure. Why are you not married? A man with a ranch, that seems like something women would be interested in." Xavier's expression grew distant. "I was engaged once back in Missouri. Girl named Catherine. She decided she did not want to follow me to Kansas, did not want the hard life of a rancher's wife. Cannot say I blame her. It is not an easy life." "Do you regret leaving?" Tabitha asked. "No," Xavier said without hesitation. "If she did not want the same life I did, then we were not meant to be together. Better to know that before marriage than after." Tabitha thought about that as they resumed their journey. She had never had time for courtship, spending all her energy helping her father and trying to make ends meet. Now, at 20, she wondered if that chance had passed her by completely. Who would want to marry a convicted murderer's daughter? The landscape began to change as they rode, the flat prairie giving way to rolling hills dotted with more trees. Xavier pointed to a creek that ran alongside the trail. "That is Big Creek," he said. "My ranch is just beyond that next rise." Tabitha felt her stomach flutter with nervous anticipation. She was about to enter a completely new life, and she had no idea what awaited her. They crested the rise, and Xavier's ranch came into view. It was modest but well-maintained, with a main house made of weathered wood, a barn, several outbuildings, and a corral where a few horses grazed. Smoke rose from the chimney of the main house, and Tabitha could see a figure moving around near the barn. "That is my hired hand, Luke Donovan," Xavier said. "Good man. He and his wife Emma live in the smaller cabin just behind the barn." As they rode into the ranch yard, Luke looked up and waved. He was a stocky man with a red beard and a friendly face. "Boss," he called. "Was starting to wonder if you got caught in that storm." "Came close," Xavier said, dismounting. He reached up to help Tabitha down, his hand steady on her waist. "Luke, This is Tabitha Kerrigan. She is going to be helping out around here." Luke's eyebrows rose slightly, but he just smiled and tipped his hat. "Pleased to meet you, Miss Kerrigan. My wife will be happy to have another woman around. She was just saying yesterday how lonely it gets." "I am pleased to meet you too," Tabitha said, her voice barely above a whisper. She was suddenly aware of how she must look, rumpled and exhausted from a night spent outdoors and a day of riding. Xavier seemed to sense her discomfort. "Let me show you to the house," he said. "You can get settled in." Tabitha followed him toward the main house, her small bundle of possessions clutched tightly. The interior was simple but clean, with a large main room that served as kitchen and living area, a stone fireplace, and 2 doors that presumably led to bedrooms. The furniture was handmade but sturdy, and everything had a place. "The room on the left is yours," Xavier said, gesturing to one of the doors. "It is not much, but it is warm and dry. I sleep in the other room. There is a wash basin in your room if you want to freshen up." Tabitha opened the door to reveal a small bedroom with a narrow bed, a dresser, a washstand, and a window that looked out over the prairie. It was the nicest room she had had in years. "It is perfect," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you." Xavier nodded and turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Tabitha," he said, and the sound of her name in his low voice made her heart skip. "You belong here. I want you to know that. Whatever happened before, whatever people said about you and your father, that is in the past. Here you get to start fresh." Tabitha felt tears prick at her eyes again, but this time they were tears of gratitude. "I will work hard," she promised. "I will earn my keep." "I have no doubt about that," Xavier said with a small smile. Then he left, closing the door quietly behind him. Tabitha sank down on the edge of the bed and looked around her new room. For the first time since her father's arrest, she felt a tiny flicker of hope. Maybe Xavier was right. Maybe she could start over here. Maybe she could build a new life. Over the next few weeks, Tabitha settled into a routine at the ranch. She woke before dawn to start the fire and make breakfast for Xavier and Luke. She cooked 3 meals a day, cleaned the house, mended clothes, and helped Emma Donovan with the baby when needed. The work was hard, but Tabitha found it satisfying in a way her life in Ellsworth never had been. Here, she was useful. Here, she had purpose. Xavier was a fair employer, never demanding more than was reasonable and always quick to thank her for her efforts. He was also surprisingly good company. In the evenings, after the day's work was done, they would often sit by the fire and talk. Tabitha learned that Xavier had left his family's farm because he wanted to build something of his own, that he had worked odd jobs for 3 years before saving enough to buy the ranch, that his dream was to expand his small herd of cattle and maybe breed horses someday. In turn, Tabitha found herself sharing memories of her parents, stories she had not told anyone in years. She told Xavier about her mother's beautiful singing voice, about how her father had taught her to read using whatever books he could borrow, about the small happy moments that made up a life. "Your father sounds like a good man," Xavier said one evening as they sat by the fire. "He was," Tabitha said firmly, "the best man I knew." "Then that is how you should remember him," Xavier said, "not by how he died, but by how he lived." Those words stayed with Tabitha in the days that followed. She found herself thinking about her father with less pain and more fondness, remembering the good times instead of dwelling on the injustice of his death. As winter began to give way to early spring, Tabitha realized she was happier than she had been in a long time. The ranch felt like home, and the people on it felt like family. Emma Donovan had become a dear friend, and baby Joseph was a constant source of joy. Luke was kind and treated her with respect. And Xavier, well, Xavier had become something she was not quite ready to name. She found herself watching him more often than she should, noticing the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the strength in his hands when he worked, the gentleness in his voice when he spoke to the horses. She told herself it was simply gratitude, that anyone would develop fond feelings for someone who had saved their life and given them a home. But deep down, she knew it was more than that. One warm afternoon in late March, Tabitha was hanging laundry outside when a rider approached the ranch. He was a large man with a star on his vest, and Tabitha's heart sank when she recognized him as a lawman. Xavier emerged from the barn and greeted the man with a handshake. "Sheriff Coleman," Xavier said, "what brings you out this way?" "Need to ask you some questions about your new hired girl," the sheriff said, his voice carrying across the yard. "Tabitha Kerrigan." Tabitha froze, a wet shirt still clutched in her hands. Xavier glanced over at her, his expression unreadable, then turned back to the sheriff. "What about her?" "There is some concern in Ellsworth about her whereabouts," the sheriff said. "Some folks think she might have had something to do with her father's crimes." Tabitha felt the world tilt beneath her feet. She had been foolish to think she could escape her past, foolish to believe she could start over. "That is ridiculous," Xavier said, his voice hard in a way Tabitha had never heard before. "Tabitha has been here for 2 months, working hard and causing no trouble. She had nothing to do with any crimes." "I am sure you are right," the sheriff said, but his eyes were cold as they moved to Tabitha. "Still, I would like to ask her a few questions." "Ask them then," Xavier said, crossing his arms. "I will be standing right here." The sheriff dismounted and walked over to where Tabitha stood. She forced herself to meet his gaze, even though her heart was racing. "Miss Kerrigan, do you know anything about the murder your father was convicted of?" "No," Tabitha said, her voice shaking. "I do not know who killed that man. I only know it was not my father." "Your father was convicted by a jury," the sheriff said. "Are you saying they got it wrong?" "Yes," Tabitha said, finding strength in her conviction. "They got it wrong." The sheriff studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I believe you," he said, surprising her. "For what it is worth, I never thought Thomas Kerrigan was capable of murder either, but the evidence pointed to him and the witness testimony sealed his fate." "Then why are you here?" Xavier asked. "Because I wanted to make sure Miss Kerrigan was all right," the sheriff said. "There is talk in Ellsworth, ugly talk about what should have happened to her. I wanted to make sure she had found somewhere safe." Tabitha felt tears sting her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. The sheriff tipped his hat to her. "You take care of yourself, Miss Kerrigan, and you, Xavier, you are a good man for taking her in." After the sheriff left, Xavier walked over to where Tabitha stood. "Are you all right?" he asked gently. Tabitha nodded, not trusting her voice. Xavier reached out and took the wet shirt from her hands, hanging it on the line himself. "No one is going to hurt you here," he said. "I will make sure of that." That evening, Tabitha found herself unable to focus on her usual tasks. She burned the biscuits at dinner and spilled coffee on the table. Xavier did not comment on either mistake, just helped her clean up and suggested they sit outside for a while. They settled on the porch steps, watching the sun set over the prairie. The sky was painted in shades of orange and pink, and the air was finally warm enough that Tabitha did not need a shawl. "I am sorry," she said after a long silence. "I should have told you that there might be trouble." "There is no trouble," Xavier said firmly. "The sheriff came to check on you, not to cause problems. That is actually a good thing. But if there is talk in Ellsworth, then it is in Ellsworth, 50 miles away," Xavier interrupted. "What people say there does not matter here." Tabitha looked at him, this man who had shown her nothing but kindness since the moment she stumbled into his camp. "Why do you believe in me?" she asked. "You barely know me." Xavier was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was low and serious. I know enough. I know you work hard without complaining. I know you are kind to Emma and patient with baby Joseph. I know you are honest, even when it would be easier to lie. And I know that the night I found you on that frozen trail, you could have stolen from me or hurt me while I slept, but you did not. That tells me everything I need to know about your character. Tabitha felt warmth spread through her chest, and she realized with sudden clarity that she was falling in love with Xavier Thornton. The realization terrified her. She had nothing to offer him, no family, no dowry, no prospects. She was a convicted murderer's daughter working as a hired hand on his ranch. What could she possibly mean to him beyond cheap labor? You are thinking too loud, Xavier said, a hint of amusement in his voice. Tabitha blinked and looked at him. What? I can practically hear your thoughts from here, he said. Whatever you are worrying about, stop. Just enjoy the sunset. Tabitha tried to do as he said, but her mind would not quiet. She was too aware of Xavier sitting beside her, of the warmth of his body just inches away, of the way her heart sped up whenever he looked at her. Tabitha, Xavier said suddenly, I need to tell you something. She turned to face him, her stomach fluttering with nervousness. What is it? Xavier seemed to be struggling with his words, which was unusual for him. These past 2 months, he began, then stopped. He took off his hat and ran a hand through his hair. Having you here has been good, better than good. I look forward to coming in from work because I know you will be there. I find myself making excuses to stay inside longer because I like hearing you hum while you work. I think about you when I should be thinking about cattle and fences and all the other things that need attention on this ranch. Tabitha's breath caught in her throat. Xavier, let me finish, he said, his blue-green eyes intense. I know this is complicated. I know you have been through hell and probably need time to heal. I know I am your employer, which makes this all kinds of inappropriate. But I cannot keep pretending I do not feel what I feel. I am falling in love with you, Tabitha Kerrigan. Have been since that first night when you stumbled into my camp and I saw the strength it took for you to keep going despite everything. Tabitha felt tears spill down her cheeks. I thought it was just me, she whispered. I thought I was alone in this. Xavier reached out and gently wiped her tears away with his thumb. You are not alone, he said. You have not been alone since that frozen trail brought you to my fire. You belong here with me, Tabitha. I knew it that first night, and I know it even more now. Tabitha leaned into his touch, closing her eyes. I am afraid, she admitted. I am afraid of losing this, of losing you. Everyone I love ends up leaving. I am not going anywhere, Xavier said firmly. He took her hand in his calloused fingers warm and strong. I am right here and I am not leaving. I promise you that. Tabitha opened her eyes and looked at him, really looked at him. She saw kindness there and strength and something that looked a lot like love. I love you too, she said, the words feeling both terrifying and right. I did not think I would ever feel this way about anyone, but I do. I love you, Xavier. Xavier smiled, a real smile that transformed his whole face. Then he leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. Tabitha did not pull away. She met him halfway, and when their lips touched, it felt like coming home. The kiss was gentle and sweet and full of promise, and when they finally pulled apart, Tabitha felt like she was glowing from the inside out. So what happens now? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Now, Xavier said, still holding her hand, we take things one day at a time. I court you properly, even though you are living under my roof. I show you that my feelings are real and lasting. And when enough time has passed that you are absolutely certain, I ask you to marry me. If you will have me, that is. Tabitha laughed, the sound surprising her. It had been so long since she had felt like laughing. That is very presumptuous of you, Xavier Thornton. "Is it?" he asked, his eyes twinkling. "Because I am fairly certain you just said you loved me." "I did," Tabitha admitted. "But a woman likes to be properly courted, you know." "Then properly courted you shall be," Xavier said solemnly, though she could see he was fighting a smile. True to his word, Xavier began courting Tabitha with a seriousness of purpose that touched her heart. Despite living in the same house, he treated her with perfect propriety. He brought her wildflowers from the prairie and left them on her dresser. He took her riding on Sunday afternoons, showing her the full extent of his land. He taught her to fish in the creek and laughed when she squealed the first time she caught something. He talked to her about his dreams for the ranch and asked for her opinions, treating her thoughts as valuable. Luke and Emma noticed the change between them and approved wholeheartedly. "About time," Emma said to Tabitha one afternoon while they were working in the garden. "I told Luke the first time I saw you two together that there was something there." "Was it that obvious?" Tabitha asked, embarrassed. "Only to anyone with eyes," Emma said with a grin. "Xavier looks at you like you hung the moon, and you blush every time he walks into a room. It is sweet." Tabitha did blush at that, but she could not help smiling too. She was happy, truly happy, for the first time since before her father's arrest. The grief was still there, a quiet ache that would probably never fully go away, but it was tempered now by joy and hope. As spring turned to summer, the ranch became busier. Xavier and Luke spent long days working with the cattle, mending fences, and preparing for the drive to market in the fall. Tabitha took on more responsibilities, not because Xavier asked her to, but because she wanted to help. She learned to milk the cow, tend the chickens, and manage the kitchen garden. She discovered she had a knack for healing, treating minor injuries for both people and animals with poultices and remedies Emma taught her. One hot July afternoon, a stranger rode into the ranch yard. He was a thin man with sharp features and cold eyes, and something about him made Tabitha uneasy. Xavier emerged from the barn and greeted the man cautiously. "Help you with something?" Xavier asked. "Looking for a woman," the man said, his gaze sweeping the ranch. "Tabitha Kerrigan. Heard she might be working here." Tabitha, who had been watching from the doorway of the house, felt her blood run cold. She recognized the man now. His name was Fletcher Morton, and he had been the witness who testified against her father. What was he doing here? Xavier noticed her in the doorway and gave her a barely perceptible shake of his head, telling her to stay inside. "What is your business with Miss Kerrigan?" he asked, his voice hard. "That is between me and her," Fletcher said. "Now where is she?" "Not here," Xavier lied smoothly. "She left a month ago. Heading to Colorado, I think she said." Fletcher's eyes narrowed. "You are lying." "I am not," Xavier said, his hand moving casually toward his gun. "And I am going to have to ask you to leave my property now." Fletcher stared at Xavier for a long moment, then his gaze shifted to the house. Tabitha shrank back from the window, her heart pounding. "I will be back," Fletcher said. "And when I come back, I am bringing the law. That girl's father owed me money, and now that debt falls to her." He wheeled his horse around and rode off at a gallop. Tabitha ran out of the house as soon as he was gone. "He is lying," she said to Xavier. "My father never borrowed money from anyone, especially not from Fletcher Morton. That man is the reason my father died." Xavier pulled her close, his arms strong and comforting around her. "I know," he said. "I could see it in his eyes. He is up to something." "What do we do?" Tabitha asked, her voice muffled against his chest. "We get the truth," Xavier said. He called for Luke, and the three of them plus Emma gathered in the house to discuss the situation. Fletcher Morton testified that he saw Thomas Kerrigan arguing with the murder victim the night of the killing, Tabitha explained. "But my father was home with me that night. I swear it on everything I hold dear." So either Morton lied, or he was mistaken, Luke said. Why would he lie? Maybe because he is the one who committed the murder, Xavier said grimly, and he needed someone to take the blame. Tabitha felt something click into place in her mind. The victim, Samuel Hughes, he was a gambler and a cheat. Everyone knew it. What if Fletcher was in debt to him? What if he killed Hughes to avoid paying and framed your father to cover his tracks? Emma finished. That is evil. It is also speculation, Xavier pointed out. We need proof. Over the next few days, Xavier made discreet inquiries in Salina and the surrounding area. He learned that Fletcher Morton had indeed been deeply in debt to Samuel Hughes, and that shortly after Hughes's death, Fletcher had suddenly come into money. He had paid off his debts and bought a small ranch, claiming an inheritance from a dead uncle. Armed with this information, Xavier contacted Sheriff Coleman. The sheriff agreed to reopen the investigation, particularly when Xavier pointed out the inconsistencies in Fletcher's testimony and the suspicious timing of his newfound wealth. The investigation took weeks, during which Tabitha lived in a state of constant anxiety. She jumped at every sound, afraid Fletcher would return to make good on his threat. Xavier refused to leave her alone, and when he had to be out on the ranch, Luke stayed near the house with his rifle in easy reach. Finally, in late August, Sheriff Coleman rode out to the ranch with news. "We got him," he said, his face grim. Morton confessed. He killed Samuel Hughes over a gambling debt, and he framed Thomas Kerrigan because your father happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. Morton saw Thomas walking home past Hughes's place the night before the murder, and figured he could use that to create reasonable doubt if he claimed to have seen them arguing on the night of the killing. Tabitha felt her knees go weak. Xavier caught her, easing her into a chair. "My father," she whispered. "He was innocent. I knew it, but now everyone will know it." "The governor is prepared to issue a posthumous pardon," Sheriff Coleman said. "It does not bring your father back, but it clears his name. That has to count for something." It did count for something. It counted for everything. Tabitha wept with a mixture of grief and relief, and Xavier held her through it all. The news spread quickly through Ellsworth and the surrounding towns. Thomas Kerrigan's name was cleared, and Fletcher Morton was convicted of murder and hung for his crimes. Several people from Ellsworth sent letters of apology to Tabitha, including Reverend Matthews and his wife. Tabitha read the letters but did not respond. She had no interest in returning to Ellsworth or reconnecting with people who had turned their backs on her when she needed them most. With the threat of Fletcher Morton gone and her father's name cleared, Tabitha finally felt like she could breathe fully again. The weight she had been carrying for months lifted, and she found herself laughing more, smiling more, living more. One evening in early September, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Xavier took her hand. "I have been thinking," he said. "About what?" Tabitha asked. "About the future," Xavier said. He turned to face her, his expression serious. "I know I said I would court you properly and take my time before asking, but life is short and uncertain. I love you, Tabitha. I want to spend the rest of my life with you. I want to wake up every morning knowing you are beside me. I want to build this ranch with you, raise a family with you, grow old with you. So I am asking now, even though it might be too soon. Will you marry me?" Tabitha felt her heart expand with so much love she thought it might burst. "Yes," she said, her voice choked with happy tears. "Yes, Xavier, I will marry you." Xavier pulled a simple gold band from his pocket. "It was my grandmother's," he said. "She gave it to me before she died and told me to give it to the woman I could not live without. That is you, Tabitha." He slid the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly. Tabitha threw her arms around his neck and kissed him, pouring all her love and hope and joy into that kiss. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were grinning like fools. "When?" Xavier asked. "When will you marry me?" "As soon as possible," Tabitha said. "I have waited long enough for happiness. I do not want to wait any more." They were married 3 weeks later in Salina, with Luke and Emma standing as witnesses and Sheriff Coleman attending as a guest. It was a simple ceremony, but it was perfect. Tabitha wore a dress that Emma had helped her sew, a beautiful blue cotton that matched Xavier's eyes. Xavier wore his best shirt and vest, his hair neatly combed for once. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Xavier kissed Tabitha with such tenderness that several people in attendance wiped their eyes. They rode back to the ranch that afternoon as Mr. and Mrs. Thornton, and Tabitha had never felt more complete. Their first year of marriage was full of hard work and harder winters, but also full of love and laughter. They worked side by side on the ranch, building it from a small operation into something truly impressive. Xavier expanded the herd and began breeding horses as he had always dreamed. Tabitha discovered a talent for keeping the books and managing the finances, freeing Xavier to focus on the physical work he loved. In the spring of 1880, Tabitha discovered she was pregnant. Xavier was beside himself with joy, fussing over her and trying to prevent her from doing any heavy work. Tabitha tolerated his hovering with good humor, knowing it came from a place of love. Their son was born in December, a healthy baby boy with Xavier's blue-green eyes and Tabitha's dark hair. They named him Thomas, after Tabitha's father, and Andrew, after Xavier's grandfather. Little Tommy was the light of their lives, and both Xavier and Tabitha doted on him shamelessly. Emma and Luke's family continued to grow as well, adding 2 more children to their brood. The ranch became a lively place full of children's laughter and the constant activity of family life. Tabitha never forgot the loneliness and despair she had felt after her father's death, and she made sure her home was always open to anyone who needed help or shelter. 2 years after Tommy was born, Tabitha gave birth to twin girls, Grace and Ruth. Xavier was terrified of having 2 babies at once, but quickly proved to be a natural father, spending hours rocking them and singing silly songs that made them giggle. Tommy took his role as big brother seriously, always wanting to help with his baby sisters. As the children grew, so did the ranch. Xavier and Luke built a larger house to accommodate the expanding family, with plenty of bedrooms and a big kitchen where Tabitha could cook for everyone. They added more cattle, more horses, and even a few sheep. The ranch became known throughout Kansas for its quality livestock and fair dealings. Tabitha never forgot where she came from or the kindness that had saved her life. She and Xavier made it a practice to help others in need, offering work to drifters, shelter to travelers, and support to neighbors facing hard times. The ranch became known as a place of refuge, just as it had been for Tabitha on that frozen night so many years ago. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Xavier surprised Tabitha by taking her on a trip to Ellsworth. She had not been back since the night she fled, and she was nervous about returning. But Xavier wanted her to see that the town had changed, that the people remembered her father as the innocent man he was. They visited Thomas Kerrigan's grave, which now bore a headstone that read, "Innocent man, loving father, gone but not forgotten." Someone, Tabitha never learned who, had been maintaining the grave and leaving flowers. She knelt beside it and told her father about Xavier, about their children, about the life she had built from the ashes of her grief. "He would be proud of you," Xavier said, his hand warm on her shoulder. "I hope so," Tabitha said. "I hope he knows I never stopped believing in him." They returned to the ranch that evening, and Tabitha felt a sense of closure she had not known she needed. The past would always be a part of her, but it no longer defined her. She was not just Thomas Kerrigan's daughter or a convicted murderer's kin. She was Xavier Thornton's wife, Tommy and Grace and Ruth's mother, a successful rancher and businesswoman, and a woman who had survived more than most people ever would. Over the years, more children came. Another son, named William, and a daughter named Eliza. The house was never quiet, never empty, always full of life and love. Xavier and Tabitha watched their children grow, taught them to ride and read and work hard, instilled in them the values of kindness and justice and perseverance. Tommy inherited his grandfather's skill with woodworking and became a talented carpenter, building beautiful furniture that was sought after throughout the state. Grace had a gift for healing like her mother and eventually trained as a nurse. Ruth loved horses and took over the breeding operation, developing a line of quarter horses that became famous throughout Kansas and beyond. William followed his father into ranching, and Eliza became a schoolteacher, opening a small school on the ranch property to educate not just her own younger siblings, but also the children of neighboring families. As Xavier and Tabitha grew older, they watched with pride as their children married and started families of their own. The ranch, which had started as a small, struggling operation run by a lonely cowboy, became a sprawling family compound housing 3 generations of Thorntons. On quiet evenings, when the grandchildren were asleep and the work was done, Xavier and Tabitha would sit on the porch of their original house, which they had kept even after building the larger one. They would hold hands and watch the sunset, just as they had on the night Xavier proposed. "Do you remember that frozen night?" Xavier asked one evening when they were both in their 60s. "When you stumbled into my camp looking like a half-frozen ghost," Tabitha laughed. "How could I forget? I thought I was going to die that night. Instead, I found my life." "I knew you belonged with me from that first moment," Xavier said. "Even before I knew your name or your story, I knew. I looked at you sitting by my fire and I thought, this is the woman I have been waiting for." "You told me that night that I belonged there," Tabitha said. "You said it so certainly, as if there was no question. No one had ever said anything like that to me before. I did not know how much I needed to hear it until you said it." Xavier squeezed her hand. "I meant it then, and I mean it now. You belong here with me, Tabitha. Always have, always will." Tabitha leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the contentment that came from a life well lived and a love well earned. She thought about the terrified girl she had been, alone and desperate on a frozen trail. She thought about the cowboy who had taken her in without hesitation, who had seen past her circumstances to the person she really was. She thought about the family they had built together, the legacy they were leaving behind. "I love you," she said quietly. "I love you more now than I did that day we married, and I loved you desperately even then." "I love you too," Xavier said, "more than words can say." They sat in comfortable silence as the sky turned from orange to pink to purple, the first stars beginning to appear. Somewhere in the distance, they could hear their grandchildren playing, their voices carrying on the evening breeze. The cattle were lowing softly in the fields and the horses were settling down for the night. Everything was peaceful. Everything was right. As darkness fell completely and they prepared to go inside, Tabitha took one last look at the prairie that had been her home for over 30 years. The land that had seemed so harsh and forbidding that frozen night had become her sanctuary, her refuge, her kingdom. And the man beside her, the cowboy who had offered her a place at his fire, had become her whole world. They walked inside together, hand in hand, into the warmth and light of the home they had built. Behind them, the prairie stretched out endlessly under the stars, beautiful and wild and free. And somewhere on that prairie, on a frozen trail that wound through the winter landscape, the ghost of a desperate girl and a kind cowboy meeting by chance still lingered, a reminder that sometimes the darkest nights lead to the brightest dawns. The years continued to roll by with the gentle persistence of prairie grass swaying in the wind. Xavier and Tabitha watched their grandchildren grow and begin bringing their own spouses to family gatherings, expanding the Thornton clan even further. The ranch now employed a dozen hands, managed primarily by William and Ruth, though Xavier still insisted on riding out to check the cattle most mornings despite his advancing years. On the morning of their 40th wedding anniversary, Tabitha woke to find Xavier already up, standing at the window watching the sunrise. She joined him, wrapping her arms around his waist from behind and resting her cheek against his back. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "Everything," Xavier said. "How different life would have been if I had ridden a different trail that night, if I had made camp somewhere else, or if you had gone in another direction. All the chances that had to align perfectly to bring us together." "Fate," Tabitha said. "That is what Emma calls it. She says we were destined to find each other." "Maybe," Xavier said. "Or maybe we were just two people who needed each other at exactly the right moment and we were smart enough to recognize it." Their anniversary celebration that evening was a grand affair, with all 5 of their children, their spouses, and 14 grandchildren in attendance, plus Luke and Emma's extended family. Tables were set up in the yard, laden with food that Tabitha and her daughters had spent days preparing. Lanterns hung from tree branches, casting warm, golden light over everything. After dinner, Tommy stood and raised his glass. "To my parents," he said, "who taught us what real love looks like, who showed us that kindness is never wasted, and that family is not just about blood but about choosing to stand by each other through everything. We are all here because of the life you built together, and we are grateful every day for your example." Everyone raised their glasses, echoing the toast. Tabitha felt tears slip down her cheeks, but they were happy tears. She looked around at the faces of her children and grandchildren, at the home they had built, at the land that had given them everything. And then she looked at Xavier, who was looking back at her with those same blue-green eyes that had seen through her fear all those years ago and recognized her worth. "Dance with me," Xavier said suddenly, standing and offering his hand. There was no music, but someone started humming, and then others joined in, creating a melody that floated on the night air. Xavier and Tabitha moved together in a slow circle, their steps practiced from decades of dancing in each other's arms. Around them, their children and grandchildren began to dance as well, forming a living testament to the love that had started it all. As they danced under the stars, Tabitha remembered something her father had told her long ago, when she was just a girl. "The best things in life," he had said, "often come from the hardest times. You just have to be brave enough to keep going until you find them." She had found her best thing on a frozen trail when she had nothing left to lose. She had found warmth at a stranger's fire and kindness when the world had been cruel. She had found love when she thought she would spend her life alone. And from that single night of chance and choice, she had built a life beyond anything she could have imagined. The years that followed their 40th anniversary were quieter, but no less full. Xavier's health began to decline slowly, his joints stiff from decades of ranch work. His breathing sometimes labored on cold mornings. Tabitha fussed over him the way he had once fussed over her, making sure he did not overexert himself, and that he took the medicines Grace prepared for him. On a spring morning in 1893, Xavier did not wake up. He passed peacefully in his sleep, Tabitha beside him as she had been for 43 years. The grief threatened to swallow her whole, but she found strength in the knowledge that they had lived fully and loved completely. There were no regrets between them, no words left unsaid, No moments wasted. They buried Xavier on a hill overlooking the ranch, under a tall cottonwood tree he had always loved. The entire community turned out for the funeral, testament to the man he had been and the legacy he left behind. Tabitha stood at the graveside surrounded by her children and grandchildren, and though her heart was broken, she knew she would survive this too. Xavier had taught her how to be strong. She lived another 12 years after Xavier's death, years spent with her family and continuing the work they had started together. She wrote down her story so her grandchildren and great-grandchildren would know where they came from, would understand that love and kindness could transform a life. She wanted them to know that their grandfather had been a hero, not because he fought in wars or performed great deeds, but because he had seen someone in need and helped without hesitation. On a cold January night in 1905, 27 years to the day after that frozen trail had brought her to Xavier's fire, Tabitha Kerrigan Thornton passed away peacefully in her sleep. She was 87 years old, surrounded by family, loved and respected by all who knew her. They buried her next to Xavier under the cottonwood tree, their graves marked with simple stones that read their names and years, and below, the inscription that Tabitha had requested. Two souls who found each other in the darkness and built a light that still shines. The ranch continued to thrive for generations, passed down through the Thornton family line. The story of Xavier and Tabitha became family legend, told and retold around dinner tables and campfires. Great-great-grandchildren who never met them still knew their names, still knew about the frozen night that changed everything. The main house still stands on that Kansas prairie, weathered but strong, a physical reminder of what can be built from love and faith and hard work. And on quiet winter nights, when the wind howls across the plains and snow covers the ground, some say you can still see them. A cowboy sitting by his fire, and a woman emerging from the frozen darkness, finding warmth and shelter and love. Finding each other at exactly the moment they both needed saving. The frozen trail that brought Tabitha to Xavier's fire that January night in 1878 had seemed like the end of everything. But it was actually the beginning. The beginning of a love story that would span nearly half a century. The beginning of a family dynasty. The beginning of a legacy that would endure long after both of them were gone. Because Xavier had been right that very first night, when he looked at a desperate, frightened girl and saw not her circumstances but her character. When he said those words that would come to define their entire relationship. "You belong here with me." She had belonged with him. From that moment until her last breath, through 45 years of marriage and 10 years after his death, she had belonged with him, and he had belonged with her. Two people who had every reason to be broken by the world but who instead found each other and built something beautiful. Their story became more than just a romance. It became a testament to the power of compassion, the importance of seeing people for who they really are rather than what circumstances have done to them, and the incredible things that can happen when someone takes a chance on another person. The Thornton Ranch still operates today, though it looks different than it did in Xavier and Tabitha's time. Modern equipment has replaced manual labor, trucks have replaced horses for most tasks, and the family has diversified into agriculture beyond just cattle. But the heart of it remains the same. It remains a place where people help each other, where family matters, where the values Xavier and Tabitha lived by are still honored. Every year on their anniversary, the Thornton family gathers at the graves on the hill. They tell the story again for the youngest generation, making sure no one forgets how it all began. They talk about Xavier's kindness and Tabitha's strength. They remind each other that their prosperity came not just from hard work but from love, that their legacy is built on the foundation of two people who chose each other when the world had given them every reason to give up. The frozen trail is still there too, winding through the Kansas prairie. It leads past where Xavier made camp that fateful night, past the rise where Tabitha first saw his fire. People use different trails now, paved roads and highways that make travel easier and safer. But the old trail remains, a silent witness to the moment that changed everything for two people who would go on to change so many lives. Sometimes modern Thorntons walk that trail, trying to imagine what it must have been like. The cold, the fear, the desperation. And then the warmth, the hope, the beginning of something that would outlast them all. They walk it to remember, to honor, to understand where they came from, because every family needs an origin story, a moment they can point to and say, "This is where we began." For the Thorntons, that moment was not a wedding or a birth or an acquisition of land. It was a choice. Xavier's choice to help a stranger, Tabitha's choice to accept that help and trust in a man she did not know. Their mutual choice to build a life together based on respect and partnership and love that grew deeper with every passing year. The story of that frozen night has been written down, passed down, and treasured by generation after generation. It has been a source of comfort to family members facing their own hard times, a reminder that darkness does not last forever and that help can come from unexpected places. It has been an inspiration to young couples starting their lives together, showing them what a strong marriage looks like. It has been a history lesson, a love story, and a family treasure all at once. And somewhere in the Kansas soil, beneath that cottonwood tree on the hill, Xavier and Tabitha rest side by side as they lived, together, where they belonged. Where they had always belonged from the moment she stumbled out of the frozen darkness, and he said the words that would define their entire future. "You belong here with me." The frozen trail had brought them together. Love had kept them together. And the family they built ensured that their story would never be forgotten, would never be lost, would always serve as a reminder of what really matters in life. Not money or status or what other people think, but kindness, compassion, love, and the courage to open your heart to someone who needs you as much as you need them. That was the real legacy Xavier and Tabitha left behind. Not land or money or even the successful ranch, though those things mattered too. Their real legacy was the example they set, the love they shared, and the proof they provided that even in the darkest moments, even when everything seems lost, there is always hope. There is always the possibility of a frozen trail leading to a warm fire, of a stranger becoming family, of an ending becoming a beginning. And in the end, that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.